owners and lead therapist at Queen City Counseling and Consulting. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about what we do, definitely available afterwards if you guys need more information, but we are a private therapy practice that specializes in teens and young adults. We offer individual therapy, and we also have the only intensive outpatient program for primary mental health for teens in Charlotte. We also offer extensive parent support, and we do have some groups for teens as well. So we are happy to help in any way, even if it's not us, but to help find the best fit for you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Doug can share our information if you need that. But more importantly, I'm excited about this topic. I want to tell you this is a heavy topic, but it is one, if you are a parent, that we all have experienced. So right away, out the gate, you're not alone. I'm a parent of two daughters, and while they are still young at 5 and 7, I have already felt the impact of parental guilt and shame. So it's normal to feel it, but the impact can be heavy and severe. And so it's important that we understand what it is and what we can do to work through it and support ourselves and our families and one another. So because this topic can be so heavy, it is a lot to cover in such a short amount of time. So I'm actually glad that there's a few amount of you, because I hope we can make this as interactive as possible. That may not be what you were excited about and hoping for, but I do think you'll get more out of it. So bear with me, try to participate. I'd love to see more of your faces, so I'm not talking to myself in the camera. No worries if you've got other stuff going on in the background, but let's get through this together. So guilt and shame, I bet many of you as parents have often felt that you wish you could just paint the words, "It's my fault," on your forehead, right? So that it could save people the time from blaming you and accusing you and being pissed off at you. Has anyone felt that way, especially as a parent? Let's just get it over with and say it's my fault right here, right? And let's move on. So you're not alone with that, especially those of you that have teens. Most often they are going to be very quick to blame you and tell you it's your fault. But even starting at a young age, the parenting books that are out there, the messages we get as parents, the different amounts of advice and types of advice from professionals, from your friends, from your family, the messages are so conflicting at times, right? So there's no true guidebook on how to do this. What truly is right or wrong? Obviously, there are some very concrete things that are not okay to do to your children. We know what those are. We don't have to go into those. But overall, who truly decides what's right or wrong when it comes to parenting? There's so many different styles and techniques, and one book says that tiger parenting is most effective, and another book says that the whole Swedish approach and offhands approach is the best way. So who really knows, right? But one consistent message that we often get as parents is, if my child isn't succeeding, I must have done something wrong. Is that not generally a consistent message that we give ourselves, that we sometimes hear from providers? What did you do? How did you screw them up, right? How many times do you ask yourselves or question yourselves, what did I do wrong? I must have failed. It's all on me, right? If my child doesn't succeed or isn't doing well or makes mistakes. So we all wear that, we all feel that, and I hope today you get some ideas, and if anything, just some support and how to deal with that. And just better understand how it impacts yourself and your family, because it has a big impact. I'm going to start with a little activity just for some self-reflection, and I do hope at least one or two of you decide to share back. I'm going to share some images with you, and as you look at these images, I'm going to scan through. I'm not going to take too much time. I want you to ask yourself, what image best represents your idea of yourself as a parent? So either how well you're doing as a parent, how well you're not doing as a parent, who you are as a parent, however you want to interpret it. But I want you to pick what image today, tonight, it could change tomorrow, but today, tonight, how are you feeling? What image represents you best as a parent? Can everyone see these?
Oh.
All right, so I'm just going to scroll through, take a look at them. what does it mean to you to be a parent, or how are you doing as a parent? How do you feel as a parent? Doesn't anything in that regards. Pick an image that might stick out to you that you resonate with tonight. So go back through one more time. Has everyone found at least one that they can connect with or resonate with? And I'll start. I don't mind starting. I'll share personally. I can connect with a lot of these lately, but the clock sticks out to me right now because I just feel like lately it's always about the clock. Where do I need to be? Am I going to be late? Do I have enough time? Oh my gosh, when can I put them to bed so I can relax? Or, oh my gosh, when do I get to see them again? I just feel sometimes controlled by the clock and time. And, you know, I want to get better at not letting that feel so controlling, right? I feel guilty sometimes for the way that I let that, you know, take over my time and my thoughts. Who else wants to go? Anybody else find an image that they could connect with?
The one that that jumped out at me was the snake, because people don't necessarily like snakes. They're, you know, just doing their snaky job. But yet the perception of them is, you know, is negative, and people avoid them.
I like that. Thank you for sharing. And is that so true? Especially as parents, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else willing to share? Maybe just one more person?
I'll share. I think what I'm seeing is a boat. Is that a boat? That's what I think it is.
Let's see. You know what? It doesn't matter. All that matters is what you see. So we'll go with you.
So what I think, it's above the snail.
It is. Yep. So a boat with, yep.
So I always kind of feel like, and this isn't a criticism on my husband, but I feel like I'm like alone on the boat, and I just have to like figure it out and know like what to do with parenting, especially with teenagers. And like just like I'm out there kind of alone, on my own. Right? That has nothing to do with my husband not supporting me. I just feel like that like, in general, and don't feel like I have like the guidance or direction to know kind of like what I should be doing.
Right, which is perfect for you to say that with our topic of conversation, because if you feel all alone and you're trying to figure it out all on your own, even though we know you have help, right? But in general, we often do feel that way. The first person you're going to blame when something doesn't go well is yourself, usually, right? So, which then leads to guilt and shame, which we'll get into in just a few minutes. So,
plus, when you feel like you're the one leading the charge, I'm in my own boat over on the other side of the lake with you. But then you feel everybody else also blames you, because you're the one who had the plan because nobody else had the plan. You're the one who implemented the plan because nobody else had a plan nor was going to implement a plan. And so then when it goes awry, then you're the one who whether you feel that way, or, I mean, whether they actually do or not, you also take the blame for it.
Yep, very true. So that leads really nicely into the next point, that one major impact, before we even talk about or discuss the definitions of the guilt and shame, it leads to the fear that we feel, the fear of us damaging our kids, right? So the fear that our mistakes or our mishaps or us not knowing or being alone and no guidance, we have this overwhelming fear a lot of the time that we're damaging our kids. Right? And these endless questions. If I'd done this differently, if I'd known that, if I'd thought about this, if I'd asked for help, right? If I'd read that book, or if I'd gone to that class, or if I had just been in a better mental space. All these endless questions about our quality of parenting, our ability to parent. It just turns into this never-ending fear that we have. And a lot of that stems from society and expectations, and how we, one, treat other parents, how we judge other parents, or how we feel judged by other parents, and our own sometimes contribution unknowingly, which is keeping these feelings that we have to ourselves, right? Because it can be really scary to share with others the ways in which you might think you're failing as a parent, or the fears you have as a parent. So that fear is one of the main things that leads us to the guilt. So one more exercise, and I promise we'll get into some of the good meat of the information. But I want each of you, and I do hope some of you will share. I have two statements, ... statements, fill in the blank. One is I did, and one is I am. Okay. So when you think about yourself as a parent, and something that maybe not necessarily a positive thought about yourself as a parent, right? So something you struggle with when you think about yourself as a parent. What is something that you can fill in the blank with I did blank, that would represent something that you often think about, maybe that's not so good in terms of your actions as a parent? And then what's something you feel about yourself, if you're willing to be vulnerable and share, in terms of I am ... So your role of a parent, what is something you've done, and what is something you are?
Does the R tie back into the what you did?
It can. It can. So I can start with an example. And this is a real example. I did lose my patience, and I yelled at my 5-year-old way too loud 2 nights ago because she got out of bed for the 5th time, and I was over it. Okay, so that is something I did. I was not patient. Something that I have felt before as a parent is I am not enough.
So I screamed at my child for not doing his schoolwork over and over again. And I mean the screaming and the not doing, like all that repeated over and over again. And that I am it's more like not really not being enough, but it's like I feel like I'm not the right parent.
Yeah, that's
Like
really
he would have
honest.
been better off with a different one.
Yeah, so that's a belief sometimes that gets in your way, right?
Right.
I'm not the right parent.
Right.
Yeah. Anybody else willing to share?
I'll share again.
Thank you.
Well, the am statement seems easier for me for some reason.
You'll understand why in a minute, which will be helpful for you.
I feel like I am not doing it right. That's
Okay.
what so that's something I struggle with. And something I did or have done, which my kids will probably remember, is more of an overall thing, is I'm really good at lecturing. Like I'm really good at it, but I know it's not effective. But like I'm
So
really
I over lectured.
I am really good at telling them why what they did didn't work and all of that. But I don't think all the lessons are gonna stick
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
hoping. Yeah.
I'm sure some of them gotten through. They will not admit it for many, 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 many years. But okay. So I over lecture, right? And then I
Yeah.
didn't do it right, or I don't know how to do it right. Sometimes can lead even to thinking I'm a failure, right? As a parent, if I don't know how to do it, I didn't do it right, then I must be a failure, right? You
Mhm.
see? So I do this activity. We go a lot more in depth in our parent support when we do this particular activity, but I wanted to do a brief version of it with you all because it depicts the actual difference between guilt and shame, right? So I'm going to read. I could blabber on and on about the difference between guilt and shame, but there's one quote that I just feel like really summarizes it very well. So I'm going to read this to you, and we'll talk a little bit about it. But guilt is an emotion, not a reality or a life sentence. Guilt arises when we become aware of failing to be the best we could have been for our children. It comes and goes and can be mild or debilitating. Guilt tries to tell us something is wrong and needs to be corrected. If it isn't faced, it turns into shame. Shame is a feeling of worthlessness and a negative sense of self. Okay, so in my that was a beautiful quote that I couldn't have said better myself, but in my own words, basically, there is healthy guilt and there is unhealthy guilt. We have to feel guilt. We have to. That's what keeps us our conscience in check, right? So healthy guilt is when you have done something wrong, something that you can take ownership and responsibility for. It doesn't mean you meant to. It doesn't mean you knew at the time you could have done anything differently. But once you realize that maybe you got it wrong, we all get it wrong as parents. All of us do. Sometimes we don't know until hindsight that we got it wrong, okay? But healthy guilt is recognizing I did get this wrong, or I could have done something different or better, right? And because of that, I have two options, and we'll get into those in a minute. Unhealthy guilt, though, the difference with that is how often do you find yourselves maybe taking ownership or responsibility for something that truly is not yours to own or take responsibility for? We all do it. We all do it. But it can lead to having unrealistic expectations of yourself as a parent. It could be it's easier just to take the blame on you, right? Instead of really holding the person accountable. So I give an example, my 5-year-old leaves her toys all over the floor. I walk in her bedroom, true story. I trip or I step on the Lego. We all know we've all stepped on a Lego, I'm sure, right? Who's responsible, right, for that pain I felt, or for me stepping, when I step on the Lego, then I yell at her and I'm really mad and angry that she didn't clean up her toys and I told her to, right? Who's responsible for me yelling at her and reacting that way?
You.
Me. Who oftentimes do you feel like the kid is going to believe is responsible and feel guilty for me yelling at them? Them. So intertwining the kids into this and ourselves, a lot of times ourselves and or our children will take ownership and responsibility for things that wasn't theirs. Yes, my daughter was responsible for not cleaning up her toys. That's what she's responsible for. But she's not responsible for my reaction to it. And we often feel guilty and take on guilt for things that aren't ours to take. Okay. And then shame comes into play. So remember a minute ago, healthy guilt. Shame is when we experience guilt, and instead of acknowledging it, forgiving ourselves, forgiving others, learning from it and doing something different, we hold on to it. We blame ourselves. We dwell on it. And over time, it evolves into, instead of just I did something that I wish I wouldn't have done or that I could have done different, I am something bad. I did something bad turns into I am something bad. And that becomes a much more intense, deep-seated emotion that can be really, really hard and hard to resolve and debilitating too at the same time. So we're going to talk about the impacts of that. But any questions right now on the differences? No? Did anyone know that there was healthy guilt and unhealthy guilt? That was something made a lot of sense to me, but I can't say I was ever taught or understood. And I definitely didn't understand that. I know now, but I didn't understand that like shame evolves from guilt. They're all correlated and connected. When we feel shame, shame is a feeling that we're unworthy, that we are flawed, that we are defective, that we are failures, right? And we've all felt this at some point or another as parents, but we have to remember our children have also felt this. They've also felt that they're flawed or they're defective or they're not worthy. And we sometimes misinterpret their behaviors and their actions as irritability, angry, pissed off. They don't care. They have no empathy, no emotions. A lot of times it's their own guilt and shame that they're feeling, and that's how they're expressing it. What's the opposite of shame? What would be the opposite? If shame is the feeling that you're unworthy, flawed, a failure, what's the opposite of shame?
Hubris?
Say that again?
Hubris, maybe?
Could be part of it. So what about self-worth? So the opposite of shame would be seeing that you had good intentions, even if you got it wrong, right? Having self-respect, having confidence even when you're not perfect, having a sense of value of yourself and your role as a parent, and not needing so much external validation for how you're doing. So think about that as parents. We often, I go back to the mom that talked about feeling alone on that boat. We feel so alone oftentimes in this journey, and we don't get a lot of validation, but we seek it. We need it. We thrive off of it. That's not necessarily unhealthy to do, but a lot of times if we're only basing our sense of value of who we are as a parent, how well we're doing as a parent, if we're only basing that off the feedback we're getting from most often our children, right? Because how often do we go and seek validation from others about how we're doing as parents? We don't, but we get a lot of that from our kids, and it's not usually the most pleasant. It's not validation, right? It's criticism. So having self-worth is not necessarily needing so much of that external approval, being confident in what you're doing. Even if you don't know what you're doing, being confident that you're doing your best. So we're talking about guilt and shame. We really, the meat of this topic is, what are the impacts of guilt and shame? How does it impact us as parents? How does it impact us in our family? What would you guys, before I go through and kind of describe to you clinically what some of those impacts are, how have you already noticed or experienced in terms of the impact of guilt and shame for yourself or within your family? Or how have you noticed how your child has felt guilt and shame, or the impacts of that?
I think it can change the way I think it can undermine your instincts, because if you focus on it, then you start to second guess yourself. And so then you don't really know how to handle a situation.
Yes.
Or I think it can also, if you've been hard on the child before and you feel guilty or feel shameful about that, then you can also swing to the other side and start lenient, because
and like overcompensate, right? And
yep. And
great examples. I imagine many of you on here can relate to what she's saying. When we feel that guilt or that shame in terms of past actions or behaviors, or when our kid has reminded us how much we've damaged them, we often do. We question ourselves, we doubt ourselves. We're not our authentic, natural selves as parents anymore, right?
Mhm.
If we question and doubt ourselves, then we're going to tiptoe around ourselves and around our children, right? We're no longer exuding ourselves as leaders or as confident adults to them, right? Yeah, can have big substantial impacts on yourself and your own self-esteem, but also on the attachment and the trust between you and your kid. Anybody else have any other thoughts or ideas about how guilt and shame can impact yourself or your family or your child? I know I have a child that over apologizes. Now, I do think this is not me trying to avoid any responsibility. I do think she has a natural personality that leads her to that. But I will say, because of that, I have a responsibility and I need to be cautious. But I can only do so much. That she's sensitive. She is very emotionally sensitive, and she is just prone to taking it all on. It must have been her fault. She is going to apologize for everything. So it is possible for someone to have a natural tendency to feel guilt excessively. We need to recognize that. Recognize it if that's who you are yourself. Do you have a natural tendency to do that? Or if you have a child who has a natural tendency to do that, then obviously it's going to take some work and education to adapt your style of parenting for them, right? To help relieve them of that unhealthy guilt, or to adapt your style of self-care and self-compassion for yourself if that's who you are. But that's one thing in my own family. You know, I'm sorry. I'm like, you don't need to be sorry. This wasn't you. This wasn't your fault. This isn't something you did. But a lot of reassurance seeking. Anyone else with any examples?
I think if you've messed up like in the past, it can maybe, like for myself, it can make you avoid parenting. Like you can just check out.
Yes.
So, and just not do anything because you
Yep.
guilt or not confident.
Yep. So that detachment, right? It leads to kind of a detached parenting style, which then leads to a whole nother set of issues, right? And then it turns into like this vicious, never-ending cycle where you feel like you can never get it right. When you were involved, you weren't getting it right. Now that you're detached, you're not getting it right. So then that turns into, I am what? I'm a failure. I'm not a good parent.
Or even feel like it's too late. Like
it's too late. Yep. That's a common one.
Easier when the kids were younger. Now that they're older, you don't have as much control or say. So yeah, it's too late. Like I wish I had done things differently when they were younger.
Yep. And because I didn't, it's too late. Why now? What's it going to matter now? So that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up. That is a big one, Doug, that a lot of parents feel. But I also want to tell you, as a therapist for teens primarily, that is a big one that teens feel too. Right? I was a bad kid. I never got it right. I tried, but it was never good enough. And they don't necessarily just feel this with you all as their parents. They feel this from their teachers, from their peers, right? What's the point now? It's too late. I'm never going to fit in. I was bullied all through elementary school. I'm never going to fit in. It's too late. So I'm not even going to try. So these are the kids, right? That we see that they're not maximizing their potential, that they're not putting their effort in. Like, you said they're not doing their homework. A lot of times it's not them just trying to be obstinate, defiant, teenagers. A lot of it goes back to this guilt and shame. And these are the repercussions and impact of that. And they don't know how to resolve it. So other impacts, low self-esteem, low confidence as a parent, as a child, as a person, depression. So one main kind of trigger or precipitating factor to depression is the feeling of shame, right? So if you have these negative beliefs about yourself that, you aren't good enough, or you are a failure, or you are the wrong parent, or you're never going to get it right, think about how how impactful negatively that can be to your emotional state. Other major impacts of guilt and shame within the family, it can damage trust. So a lot of times we as parents may feel guilt and may internally want to take ownership and responsibility, but my goodness, I am not going to own that to my kid. They will run all over me. They will take advantage of me. There's no way I'm going to apologize to them, right? But your kid knows. They know that it's something that maybe does deserve an apology. So the trust there, right? Trust gets damaged, and vice versa. It works both ways. Leads to a lot of conflict. So this overwhelming feeling of guilt and shame often does shift our mood to we're feeling more irritable, more tired, more angry, more frustrated. Our tolerance level is now lower. Life already makes us tired enough, right? You add this guilt and shame to it, it's overwhelming. We go into a fear-based parenting. Think, you talked about that in a minute ago. Well, I'm so fearful now that I'm going to get it wrong again. Like, I'm going to go the opposite. I don't know if you guys have seen the new Yes Day movie on Netflix, but I'm just going to say yes to everything, or I'm going to just give them everything, or overlook, if it's not life or death, I'm overlooking it all. Right? And sometimes that is the easier way to go. But that reaction is based on guilt and shame that you're probably feeling that's unresolved. We often will project our own feelings of guilt onto our kids and can become resentful towards them. And if we're going to be honest in here, all of us have had a moment, I'm sure, where we've felt resentment in some way or another, right? Resentment of the stress or the worry or the sleepless nights. And it's hard to own that and admit that. People don't talk about it, right? What kind of parent am I if I say I've resented my kid? I must be a bad parent, right? It's hard. We don't have many safe spaces where we can own and talk about those things. But when we don't, it turns into this guilt and shame that we harbor, which sometimes gets projected to our kids. They perceive us as being angry at them, and we act angry towards them when oftentimes we're really angry at ourselves. Now, don't get me wrong, they do enough to make us truly angry at them, but a lot of times the level of anger is coming from a place within where we're feeling this guilt and shame. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. It can lead to us isolating and withdrawing, so it can leave you really feeling detached, not only from maybe your kid, but you could get detached from your husband, your wife. Oftentimes we will compare ourselves to the other parent in the home, and if we're feeling not as good as or more unworthy, we're going to maybe detach ourselves, isolate ourselves. It can create conflict between you and your spouse or your co-parent. Creates a big lack of motivation. I've been doing this, I keep getting it wrong. No matter what therapist I go see, what book I read, how many times I try to take ownership or do things differently, I just can't get it right, right? So it leads to a big overwhelming sense of just not feeling motivated, feeling tired, worn out. Can you guys think of any others that I didn't mention? Any other significant impacts? Can you guys relate to any of those? Yeah. Is there any one of those that really stick out to you in terms of your own family? You don't have to get too personal, but anything you can say?
I definitely do a lot of tiptoeing.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to just not comment because just because it doesn't, I don't know. But anyway, but that's all of that, keeping not commenting and tip is very stressful. I mean, your instinct is to say something,
right?
And you're trying to, to keep it to yourself, and then you just have you just continue to tiptoe and not
So
say.
here's the vicious cycle, right? The reason why you start tiptoeing is because you felt guilty about a previous moment when you didn't tiptoe and you were direct and assertive, right?
Right.
And so then you change your behavior because of that guilt. You
Right.
tiptoe, it goes against your core of what you want to do in that situation. So
Right.
then that situation plays out. And then when it doesn't play out well, let's say that they, I don't know, there's a consequence of some sort for them and they struggle or suffer more, who are you then blaming?
Well, yourself, because you,
Yeah, now you're taking an unhealthy guilt approach because you're saying, well, because I didn't say anything, that's why they failed or that's why they suffered, right?
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very vicious cycle. So, obviously I'm looking at the time. We could go so in depth with this, but it would behoove me not to get to the part where we talk about what do we do about this. We all acknowledge we feel it. We all acknowledge we experience it. I just went through a laundry list of really debilitating, severe, difficult impacts it can have on yourself and your families. I'm focusing on you all as a parents tonight. I'm trying to give examples. I just want you to know that those impacts to you personally, your children are feeling those too themselves in their own ways, right? They just exhibit them differently. So I do want you, when you think about hopefully this information later, maybe ask yourself, how might my child be feeling guilt or shame? And how might it be coming out and I've been misinterpreting that, right? And have you ever talked with your kid about what guilt and shame is? I do have a handout or two that kind of very simply explains guilt and shame. If anybody wants something like that, get my information from Doug. I'd be happy just to send you some stuff if you want some conversation starters for you and your child. But it could be a really good topic to bring up with them, because I know that I wish when I was younger I could have better understood the role of guilt and shame and what it really was and the toll it could take on you. But how do we cope with it? So how can we cope with healthy guilt? Healthy guilt, remember, is whether we knew it in the moment or not, we realize that there is something maybe we could have done differently, or maybe something that we wish we hadn't done and have regret over it. These steps seem very simple, but my goodness, they are so hard in the moment to actually do, which is why we end up experiencing so much shame, right? So the seemingly simple steps are, first and foremost, ask yourself, what responsibility in that situation was truly mine to take? So you have to distinguish, is the guilt you're feeling healthy or is it unhealthy? Out of the entire situation that happened, what truly was, so kind of like the situation you were describing, Rebecca, of I'm going to end up blaming myself because I didn't speak up because he failed his class. If I'd spoken up, maybe he wouldn't have failed his class. Well, maybe there's some responsibility there for you, right? And maybe learning that it is more important for you to speak up than tiptoe. But not all the responsibility of him failing the class falls on you, right? So if you take on the guilt of all of it, that's really heavy. If you can separate what truly was my responsibility and what wasn't, and then just own what was yours.
What if you have a skewed vision of what was your responsibility?
That's where asking for help, getting support, seeking input outside of your own world, because we stay trapped, isolated, we feel powerless and alone when we let guilt and shame control us. So guilt and shame lead to us feeling trapped, isolated, powerless, and alone, which is going to lead then to a skewed view, right, of what rationally might be healthy versus unhealthy guilt.
Right.
Yeah. That's why I'm glad we bring up this topic in these safe settings like this, because man, oh man, like just even 1 or 2 hours of parents getting together, being vulnerable and talking about what they feel guilty about and being able to get that support and empathy from one another, it can relieve so much guilt that we've carried. We can actually be more compassionate to ourselves. So distinguishing what's really mine to own, right? And then once you distinguish what's yours to own, express genuine sorrow for that. Don't just identify what you need to own, now own it. Express sorrow for that. And it depends on the age of your child, but there's no child too young for you to begin doing that with. And there's no child, Doug, back to what you said, there's no child too old. It's never too late. So even if it was something, and I can tell you from a therapist that does attachment-based family therapy, it is never too late. If there was something 5 years ago that you just know right? That you want to, you need to take ownership for. It is never too late. Never too late to do that. So express the sincere sorrow, but follow it up with a commitment to do something different. That's really important. Just like your kids often, I'm sorry, I'll turn in my homework next time. I'm sorry, I'll put my clothes away. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. But then that gets old if you don't actually see a commitment to them changing, right? That sorrow is no longer genuine. So it's got to be followed with like a commitment to change. You're not going to get it right away, especially if it's a behavior that's a habit for you, right? Or if your personality naturally is a low tolerance personality, it's gonna take you a while to change, but make a commitment to try to change. Ask for forgiveness. We'll say we're sorry, but how often do we actually ask for forgiveness? Right? So think about that. It's really important. And you may think that your kids don't need to hear that from you, or they would laugh at you. They may actually laugh at you when you ask that, but I can tell you it will mean something. It will mean something. Most importantly, in my opinion, in all of this is forgiving yourself. Working on forgiving yourself, letting it go, being compassionate to yourself, and understanding that you're not perfect. There is no true one-size-fits-all to parenting. And especially those that parent multiple children, you are one person with one upbringing, with one background, with your own things, and you're expected to parent and get it right with different personalities of kids who need different types of things and need a different side of you. How unnatural is that? Right? So how are you supposed to get it right? Right? How are you supposed to get it right? It's an impossible task if you think about it. But you can try your best, right? And you can be compassionate to yourself and have realistic expectations for yourself. Shame is a little bit more difficult. You need to do those same steps that we just talked about with guilt, but shame, recognize your own vulnerability to shame. Some of us are more vulnerable to shame because of our upbringing, maybe our own trauma, our own personality. I'm telling you, I have a daughter that's going to be more vulnerable to that. Recognize your own vulnerabilities to shame so that you can, one, have more compassion for yourself, you can understand yourself a little bit better, and you can know what kind of support you need. Recognizing it's not all on you. So there are external factors that can contribute to our situations, right? That are out of your control. So yes, some things might have been in your control that you could do differently, but there could have been extenuating circumstances out of your control that made you more prone or vulnerable to that, right? So recognizing those external things that can create and contribute. For shame, empathy and connecting with others is one of the most important steps to take in resolving it and working through it and healing from it. So you all, even though it's a small group, you all even just hearing from each other tonight that you feel it, that it's valid, it's understandable. You know, I'm a child therapist, and I just owned to you and publicly that I yelled at my kid inappropriately the other night, right? That could make you not want to come and solicit my services. Like, that's a risk, right? But I'm human, the same as you all, and we need to own it. We need to be there for each other. So have the empathy for yourself, but have the empathy for others, and be willing to share and be willing to offer support. So that's one of the biggest parts of resolving shame. Too often we're silent and we're afraid to discuss. Now, society perpetuates that a lot. If you're on too many of the mom groups on Facebook, it's going to perpetuate it, right? Like, depending on what you watch or who you're around and who you talk to, you know, these images we see of these perfect families that get it right all the time, it's not real. But when we are bombarded by it, it makes us feel that way. It makes us feel less than and not worthy. Self-affirmations. We do not get validated enough as parents, period. We don't get enough credit for it. It's not recognized enough. We're often the first people blame when anything goes wrong or bad happens to our children, right? We are judged. We are criticized. We definitely don't receive the validation that we deserve, and not often enough. And so it has to start with you. You have to work on giving yourself affirmations. And one of the most important affirmations that I remind myself of, but I teach parents, is remembering and saying, I did the best I could in that moment with what I had and what I knew. That doesn't mean I can't do better. I can do better. Now I see how I can do better. Now I understand something I could have done differently. But in that moment, or in this moment, I'm just going to try to do the best I can with what I have and what I know. And it may not be enough, but it's the best I can do with what I have and what I know. And I'm going to be willing to keep learning, keep asking questions, keep getting feedback, right? But if I sit in this guilt and shame, I'm not going to be motivated to learn or make changes. I'm not going to feel confident that I can grow. My anger is not going to let me have that drive to do anything different. Does that make sense? I'm looking at the time. I don't want to save some room for a little bit of conversation and wrap up. But because I'm talking about self-affirmations, I want to read you a quote. Some of you may have heard of this quote or not. I'm actually going to share it. So we're going to talk about the quote, and then I'm just going to give you a heads up. We are going to all think of just what is something that you can acknowledge out loud to us all that you have done well as a parent, right? So what is something that you've tried your hardest or you have done well as a parent? So I am going to push you to start tonight with those self-affirmations, because if you're waiting to get that from everybody else, you're going to be waiting, right? So let's go to this quote first, and then we'll end with affirmations and questions. Has anyone heard the man in the arena quote? Anyone familiar with that? Can you guys see it? I'm going to read it to you, but I know there are different learning styles, so I'm hoping it might be big enough if some of you need to read it to yourself. But Teddy Roosevelt, I think this depicts very clearly what we're talking about tonight. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man in the arena whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who have never known neither victory nor defeat. It's a lot to take in. I encourage you all to look this quote up and read it again to yourselves. But anyone willing to take a gander on why I'm presenting this quote tonight in a conversation talking about guilt and shame in the form of parenting?
It's better to be in the arena actively parenting as opposed to disengaging from the whole parenting situation.
Yes. Expect to fail. Expect to fail. Because if you expect to be perfect, you've already failed, you know? It is better to be in the arena, and the arena is not pretty. It is gory, it is dusty, it is bloody, but every morning you get up and you continue to be a parent, you're putting yourself in that arena. You're in that parenting arena, and it is the hardest thing you'll ever do. But you're in it, and you're fighting, and you're trying, and that's the best you could do, right? So think about that. It takes a lot of courage to get in that arena. It's a lot easier to stay on the outside of it and point the finger and be the critic and all of that. So I do encourage you guys to go back and read that quote a little more thoroughly. It's a lot of meaning to it, especially when you consider it in the form of parenting. But in terms of self-affirmations, what did you guys come up with? What is something that you can share with us that you've done well recently in terms of your parenting? Or something you're trying to change or do better at?
Well, based on the quote, I feel like I do strive valiantly. If that, yeah. So at least I try.
Yes. So whether I get it right or not, I'm trying.
Right.
Yeah, that's huge. It's huge. Who else?
I think I try to encourage my kids and show affection, like hug them, or I think I'm good at that.
Awesome.
So
I'll share. It was actually this morning, and because the clock was my image, it's very fitting. I, against everything that I felt this morning, got up early because my daughter wanted me to curl her hair with a curling iron for the first time. And her bus comes early, so I had to get up really early, but I feel proud of myself that I did it and I followed through with it, and it made her feel so special that it happened. So it's a little thing, but there's nothing too small to help us feel like, okay, we did something, something that meant something in a positive way. The rest of you, whether you're sharing it out loud or not, I do encourage you before you go to bed tonight, think of something. You're all doing many things that are good and helpful and loving for your families, your children. And if you really are struggling to come up with anything, then I encourage you to reach out to someone and ask them, what is something you've seen me do well, or what is something I do well as a parent? Could be a tough question. You have to have a lot of courage to ask that question, maybe to be vulnerable enough to ask that question of your spouse, or ask one of your children. It's real scary to think about doing, but you might be surprised in what they actually would share with you, or ask a close friend. But I hope all of you, can think of at least one thing or be told one thing tonight, because you deserve it, that you've done well as a parent. So that's all I have. There's so much more we could go into and we could pick apart with this topic, but I hope that there is at least one thing you can take away from this, if not just better understand the cycles of guilt and shame and how impactful they are, and some things you can do to try to work through resolving those and the impact that it can cause. Are there any questions that anybody has, or comments or information that anybody needs? No? All right, Doug, is there anything that you have to wrap up with, or?
no, just thank you so much. This was great. I think it'd be awesome too. I'll connect with you. I'd love to have you do this. You have like a version for the kids, like this.
Yeah, we can do that.
That you said too. I think it'd be good with them, as you see teenagers when they just don't want to try.
Right.
And
yep.
It clicked, because a lot of that's probably just guilt and shame.
So much of it is.
Yeah.
And sadly, so much of that comes from it is something, often that happened so long ago that if they had known how to express it or talk about it or explore it with someone, they wouldn't have had to harbor it, and let it linger for so long.
Right.
But they just don't know how. And so it does. It turns into guilt and shame, and it impacts their performance.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for tonight and doing this, and we appreciate all that you do for TrinityPrep and for the community and for our teenagers and kids. So
thank you. Glad to do it.
Thank you. And we'll be in touch, and it's always awkward at the end. I'll hit the end, and y'all have a good night. And if
Thanks, y'all too.
Ashley's info, let me know. I'm happy to get you connected to them. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks. Y'all have a good night.
You too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.